Start. So my name is Joey Surge. I'm obviously a BISC grad. After Marquette, I went to law school. I went to Minnesota, started out in patent litigation and did that for a couple of years. So I was certified to take the patent bar, took the patent bar, passed it. Your BISC degree does allow you to do it if you take the right classes. So if you're interested in patent law, and we can get into it later, you might want to start considering what classes you're taking now. Currently, I'm actually an administrative law judge, so I don't do any legal practice outside of that. But I've done quite a few different things. Just before this, I did aerospace and aviation defense litigation. So I've kind of run the gamut in what you can do in law. So any questions you've got, I'm happy to answer.
I can go next. So my name is Erin Herdeman. I'm a pretty recent BISC alum. I graduated in 2018. I'm actually still a law student, so I'm happy to answer questions about the process of getting into law school, how I navigated getting to law school and choosing that. But similar to Joey, but a little different, I'm right now hoping to practice patent prosecution. So that's like the writing of patent applications and a bunch of other things. But I've been clerking at a firm, so working there part-time during the school year and full-time in the summers for a little over a year. And I'm really enjoying it. So happy to answer any questions you have kind of leading up to actually practicing.
Hi, everyone. I don't know if you can see me. I'm Caitlin. I also am a BISC grad and went to law school. I thought that I would be doing intellectual property or patent law, but while there, I ended up working for the Innocence Project and fell in love with crim law. So was a public defender for about 9.5 years, and now I clerk for a judge in the Wisconsin Court of Appeals. So can talk a little bit about what made me change and what led up to that decision. But it's nice to meet everyone.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much. So I'll open it up to you guys and any questions you may have for any of them or all of them.
So what do you guys do with science still? Like, I guess it really depends on the cases that you're working on, but anything?
So I can take that. As a public defender, I use my science degree a lot because I was representing people who were convicted of homicide, all sorts of crimes. So I definitely came in handy when looking at DNA results, when going over autopsy reports. Another example would be even like a OWI case. With that type of case, you have all sorts of science comes in. You have toxicology reports to contend with. So I used it a ton in that respect.
I can answer that one a little bit too. Again, my experience is limited to a little over a year, but everyone I work with is either engineer, a scientist, someone with a technical degree. So just at what everybody's interested in talking about on a regular basis is pretty science driven. But a lot of our clients are doctors, are scientists and engineers. They work in pharmacology. They create medical devices. So I think that my science degree comes up all the time just in understanding the technologies that our clients are working with and being able to ask the right questions, because that's a huge part of patent law is just being able to know that your client is the expert, but asking them the right questions. So I would say it comes up constantly in my limited experience as well.
Yeah, and it's pretty common in mine as well. Please excuse my cat, who is very needy right now. But when I was doing patent law, I was doing a little bit of life sciences stuff. So you're talking to people who are working in science every single day. And frankly, it goes a long way when you can actually speak some of their language, just with client retention, with things like that, and trying to understand what they're saying and what they're looking for. But it's also come up in quite a few odd ways. when I did aviation and aerospace defense, the main areas I focused on was helicopter crashes. And so I was reading a lot of autopsy reports because unfortunately a lot of people don't survive helicopter crashes. So it's coming into play there quite a bit. And when I'm bringing in expert witnesses that I need to walk a jury through some certain autopsy finding, I'm able to converse with them on a different level than most attorneys. Frankly, the biggest thing, it's not so much science that comes in, but you've been exposed to so much material that's so dense that just really teaches you how to think about the law, and it helps you read all of the cases and digest a lot of information quickly. And that's something that you really have to do to be a good lawyer.
Great, thank you guys. Did anyone else have any questions? Go for it.
Yeah, so following up on the questions you just asked, what made you guys go from BISC to law?
I can start.
Go
Go ahead. All right, I'll start so we can do this easier. I actually did BISC knowing I wanted to do intellectual property litigation. So you can see how that worked out for me now that I'm no longer doing intellectual property litigation. So it wasn't really a fallback for me, it was a goal. And so because all three of us considered intellectual property litigation, the one distinction we haven't made yet, but we've kind of hinted at, is there's two different levels of it. There's the litigation aspect where you're actually in court, you're litigating cases, and then there's the prosecution aspect where you're actually sitting down and writing the patents. And you don't typically have a patent attorney that is going to do both, and there's a lot of reasons why you're not doing both. Frankly, it takes two very different personalities to do each. So more outgoing people tend to go towards litigation. More introverts tend to go towards prosecution. And they're both really interesting careers, but they're both very different. So if you are considering law and you're considering intellectual property, you might want to look into the differences because you may be better suited. Your personality may be better suited for one than the other. But for me, like, I knew I wanted to be in the courtroom. I knew I wanted to litigate cases. So it really wasn't a shift from BISC to intellectual property litigation. To do intellectual property, at least in front of the Patent and Trademark Office, especially with prosecuting patents and writing them, you have to have a science background. You can't get barred with the Patent and Trademark Office without a science background. So for me, when I went into it, I knew what I wanted to take, what I wanted to do, and so built my degree around that before going into intellectual property.
And I'm a little bit of the opposite. I came into Marquette thinking I definitely wanted a clinical career, and specifically chose Marquette for BISC because I thought that the department and the major was incredible. And then I hit the end of my sophomore year and didn't see myself as a clinician anymore, and kind of panicked and started taking some BISC courses that went into topics that were more in line with policy, and like I took moral behavior of or like biology of moral behavior and policy, and it really goes into some more legal aspects of science. And I took some crim classes, and I didn't really know what I was going to do when I went to law school, but I knew I didn't want to be in a lab, and I knew I didn't want to practice medicine. So I kind of took a risk and thought that I would end up doing something more like health law, or medical malpractice, or something in that direction. And like Joey was just saying, you come into law school with a science degree or an engineering degree, and you're very much funneled into intellectual property, which for good and bad reasons. I ended up really liking it, and am kind of getting a little bit of a taste of litigation as well, but he is also correct in saying that people don't do both. The firm that I'm working at right now is almost purely prosecution, so just writing the patents, but there's probably 3 or 4 litigators in the firm, which is a little rare, and I'm doing something called moot court, which you can probably picture what it's like, but it's fake arguments. So getting a taste of that as well in law school. So you have 3 years before you really have to pick a direction if you were to choose intellectual property and patent law specifically. But my switch kind of came just in deciding that I didn't like the two main directions that I could go if I wanted a clinical career.
So it's hard for me to actually remember because I feel like I've been out of law school so long, but I have to say I knew one of the things that I had always enjoyed was research and writing. And so if given a choice for chemistry class, I would choose the chemistry class that allowed me to do a paper versus the chemistry class that would require me to do a bunch of labs. And so I ended up realizing through undergrad after taking all the classes that although I really enjoy science, at the end of the day, my favorite thing was to research and write, which I do quite a lot now.
Sure, we'll go in the same order as last time, I guess. So my name's Joey Surge. Diane, I swear every time I come back here, I have a different job.
I know. That was funny. They wanted a bio for you, and I was like, I can't find him online. Like, I don't know where he is now. I did everything I remember you doing.
Yeah, I think last year I was aviation and aerospace defense. I'm actually an administrative law judge now. So that's why I'm not online. So any questions you guys have about being a judge, I can give you about a month and a half's worth of experience. Beyond that, I have about 5 or 6 years of legal experience. So obviously, I'm a BISC grad. I went on to law school and started out in intellectual property litigation. And then most recently, as I said, was aviation and aerospace defense. And now I'm an administrative law judge. So any questions you've got about the legal field, I'm pretty sure I've covered it somewhere in my career already.
Nice.
And I can go next. My name's Erin Herdeman. I'm a pretty recent BISC alum. I graduated in 2018. I'm actually still a law student. I've got a year left. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have about pivoting into possibly going to law school, the process of applying, the first couple years. I've been working at a patent prosecution firm, so also in intellectual property for about a year now. And the cool thing about your BISC degree, which I'm sure Joey might mention, but he mentioned with the last group, is that it opens you up to a very cool niche of the law that is reserved just for people with technical degrees. So you have to have a science, engineering, a couple other things to actually be able to practice. So it's definitely a cool area of it if it's of interest.
Hi, everyone. I'm Caitlin. So I was a public defender for about 9.5 years. And I think I forgot to explain this to the last group. But what I did as a public defender was I specifically focused on appellate law. So I would review cases and convictions after somebody's found guilty at trial and look for issues to get either a new trial, plea withdrawal, sentencing, in that respect. And now I have taken a new job and work for a judge.
Not Joey, right?
No.
No, he wouldn't accept me.
Didn't get an interview.
Yeah.
So, Erin, you were the more recent grad. You're in law school now. How does law school compare to your experiences as undergrad? I have the unique opportunity of being your advisor, so I remember all the different careers that we navigated. Like, what do you think now? Where are we at?
I think that you were exactly right in telling me that I would be surprised by how much my BISC knowledge and learning style would set me up for law school. It sounds crazy to say, but yeah. It sounds crazy to say, but it's hard in such a different way. And if I had to put the two up against each other, as far as just brain power hard, I think I maybe would put BISC ahead of it. So it requires a lot of work, but it's not the same thing that you've been doing for the past however many years you've been a BISC student. I love my classes in law school. I think that they make me think pretty critically, like a lot of classes that you all have already taken. But it's also kind of a new style. The part that's similar to BISC is that very rarely are you going to have a class or an exam where it's complete memorization and you're just regurgitating it. It's a lot more thinking, it's a lot more problem solving, and I think that I was better prepared to do that than a lot of my peers in law school, at least from that critical thinking standpoint. So I think I made a great decision with your help, Diane. I'd do it again. And I would definitely recommend it for students who have any interest in it and want to find unique ways to use their BISC degree, even if it's not the science aspects of it.
I have a question about how much interaction you have with people in your day-to-day goings on in the office.
Joey, Caitlin, I'll let you guys go since you have practiced more than me so far.
For the last year or so, I've been working from home. I can tell you, even now, all of my hearings are actually done by phone, so I don't have to dress up any more than I did tonight. And frankly, I probably dressed up a little more than I usually do for hearings. But for me, I've got quite a bit of interaction with individuals because I'm holding anywhere from, I think on a heavy day, about 5 hearings. So I'm interacting with both individuals that are being represented. Sometimes I'm interacting with the lawyers. Prior to that, when I was working in a firm, I was probably in touch with everyone maybe once a week in a conference call. Beyond that, depending on who you're working with on cases, you're probably in touch with them every couple days. So it really varies on what you're doing. Some of it is you're going to be babysat on some cases, depends on the partner you're working with. On others, you may have no communication at all for a week at a time.
So as a public defender, I did have a fair amount of contact with clients. I've been to every prison in Wisconsin, I will say. But now as I'm working for a judge, I actually don't have any contact with people except for those in my office, support staff, and the judge.
Do you guys mind saying some of the things that you were involved with when you were on campus that might have led to your current career path?
I can go first on this one. I think it was a combination of a lot of different things. I don't think I could pinpoint it to one thing except the fact that I pretty much by the end of my sophomore year knew I didn't want to have a clinical career. I had worked in a research lab in the BISC department for 2 years at that point, didn't want to do it. I loved the lab, but I didn't want to be in a lab. I had shadowed a lot of doctors and PAs and pretty much everything you could think of, and I didn't want to do that either. So that was partially an involvement, but something that I knew kind of meant I needed to pivot. I was involved in Greek life and ended up volunteering at a lot of domestic violence shelters through it, and that kind of drove a more social justice lens for me, just like an inkling to want to know how to help in different ways, which maybe wasn't as much the legal, but that's why I started taking more classes that were policy-based, healthcare-based, just things that were different ways to help people, because I knew that's what I wanted to do, even if it wasn't a clinical career. So those were a few of the things that were experience-based, but I never really had any legal experience in undergrad, and I really wouldn't say that you need it. So even if you think you might want to do this, unless you want it just to see what it looks like, I wouldn't say that you need it before deciding to go to law school.
So for me, sorry, Diane, but lawyers tend to be very heavy drinkers, and I was very good at that when I was at Marquette. But one of the big things that pushed me towards intellectual property litigation and just IP law in general, I was actually working in the Manch lab for quite some time. And I also worked with Dr. Baker, and I know they had some stuff to do with Promentis and getting to see a little bit of that side and talk to the professors about that. That really started to push me towards intellectual property litigation as a career.
For me, the thing that I think started to point me towards law was that I found that I really enjoyed the classes that I had to do papers and research and writing. I also did work in a lab, and one of the things I enjoyed was reading all of the research papers that occasionally came across my desk and presenting my findings. And so that kind of made me start thinking about other options outside like just the BISC field. So for that reason, I knew research and writing was really important to me. And I think to be a lawyer, you do have to be able to research and write.
Did you all go directly into law school after your degree?
Since was just talking, I went straight from undergrad to law school.
Yeah, I went immediately after finishing my BISC degree.
And I took a gap year. I think I had mostly sold myself on law school, but I wasn't all the way there, and had already taken my LSAT, but I worked full-time for a year, not in a legal career, before going to law school. So that's why, hence I have one more year left.
Yeah, and one important thing I think to note on that point, gap years are not a bad thing with law school. When you're applying, there are certain schools like Northwestern University, I think it's something along the lines of 90% of their students have at least 1 year of full-time work after or before law school, and it's maybe 80% have 2 years or more. So it's really actually beneficial if you're not sold on law school to take a year, and it really doesn't matter what you do, but just get that experience in the real world, and that can be really beneficial and get you into better schools to some extent.
And just to add to that, I actually felt, having gone immediately from undergrad to law school, I was probably at that time at least in the minority in terms of most of my classmates. I went to Madison, had several years of working experience. Some of it was related to law, some wasn't. And in some respects, I think that would have been nice to get that experience under your belt when it comes to trying to find a job.
All right, hello guys. Here's another group for you guys. If you guys want to go ahead, introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about what you do, that'd be great.
Sure, my name's Joey Surge. Obviously, I'm a BISC alum, went to law school right afterward. I am currently an administrative law judge, but I started out in intellectual property litigation, and most recently, before becoming a judge, did aviation and aerospace defense. So I've kind of run the gamut of everything, or most things you can do in law.
My name is Erin Herdeman. I'm a recent BISC alum. I just graduated in 2018, so I am still in law school. I'm happy to answer questions you have about the process of getting into law school, what classes in school look like. But I have been working at a patent prosecution firm for the last year, so also in intellectual property. And that, compared to Joey, mostly involves like the writing of patents and less courtroom experience, but happy to be here and answer questions.
I'm Caitlin Lamb. I was a public defender for about 9.5 years. As a public defender, I did appellate work. So what I would do is, once somebody's convicted, I would review the case and conviction and make sure that everyone got a fair trial and everything went the way it should. So if anyone has questions about that, happy to answer that.
Go ahead.
Did any of you guys have like a minor or double major that you used when applying to law school? Or if you didn't, what made you want to apply to law school after being a BISC major the whole time?
I can start on this one. I did have a criminology minor. I didn't add it until my sophomore year, when I realized I didn't want to have a clinical career and started liking crim classes and figured I should take a bunch of them and get a minor in them. I don't think that it made a difference when I applied. I don't know that I needed it. I recognized maybe some of the terminology a little more easily in classes, but I wouldn't say that, in my opinion, any minors would have been extremely helpful or necessary. I kind of took the law school pivot again because I found some things that were more interesting to me, didn't want a clinical career, and knew I might need more school to do something that I was really happy with. And I think it was a great decision, but.
I can go next. So I didn't have any type of minor or double major, but I did also take a lot of courses in criminology and basically anything that I felt was kind of writing intensive to help me prep for law school. So really enjoyed like the English classes, and I think I took it some poli-sci. So just a wide variety of courses to help me prep.
So I'll be very blunt in my experience. I don't think a minor is going to help you in any way get into law school. I would highly recommend it if there's an area you're interested in, but if it's just to or better your application, there are a lot of other things you can spend your time doing that'll be much more beneficial. Law school applications are really basic. Obviously, a BISC degree is going to put you ahead because they love science majors because they can push them into intellectual property. I know Aaron mentioned this in a previous session. And it's a lot easier to find intellectual property jobs than it is to find jobs in other areas of law. But when law schools are looking at applications, the two things that they're looking at more than anything are your LSAT score and your GPA. Beyond that, it really doesn't matter what major you are. As I said, of course, BISC can put you ahead because it's a science major. But I had people that were theater majors in my class. It really didn't matter what the substance was. So if you're considering a minor for academic purposes, go for it. If you're just considering it for law school, put your effort into the LSAT and maintaining a certain GPA. To answer the second part of your question about turning to law, I went into BISC knowing I wanted to do intellectual property litigation. And one thing we haven't mentioned yet is to do intellectual property prosecution where you're writing patents. You actually have to be barred with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. And to do that, you have to have a science background. And BISC allows you to get barred as long as you can pass the exam. You can do patent litigation without the PAT bar, but it is much harder to find a job if you don't qualify to take the PAT bar or you haven't passed it.
Can you guys maybe say something that you like, something that you guys love about your job, or something like your day-to-day lives, like what you guys are doing right now?
I can go. So my experience is limited to 2 years of law school and 1 year at a firm. But what I like most about intellectual property and specifically patent law right now is that everyone I'm working with either has a science degree, has an engineering degree, something technical. So I feel like I get along with them well. Our brains work in similar ways. And all the clients that I work with are doctors, engineers, people making medical devices and life-saving technologies and things that I think I was really passionate about in BISC, but didn't know how to work with because I didn't want to be the person creating them. But I just am every day blown away by how smart everyone I work with is, including all the inventors. And I think I felt that way in BISC a lot. It's a competitive major. You're all very smart. And I feel that I'm challenged often, especially still being a student. So those are a couple of things that kind of keep me going and thinking I'm in the right place.
So I can go next. As far as my day-to-day now, I'm just handling hearings most of the day, most of the morning and early afternoon, and I usually spend my afternoons writing decisions and opinions. Prior to that, when I was in a firm, the day-to-day life is much different. So if you're considering patent law, especially litigation, not so much prosecution from what I've seen, you're going to be essentially on call 24 hours a day. I've gotten emails at 2 a.m. I've gotten emails at 6 a.m. on a Saturday. It's all about the billable hour when you're in private practice, especially in litigation. So if you do want to go that route, it pays very well, but you sacrifice quite a bit of work-life balance. You really don't have much of a life outside of it. As to what I really enjoy about it, throughout my career, what stands out to me is when I get the opportunity to help people, and I get to do that now as an administrative law judge. I didn't mention it in my intro, but I also did a year of criminal prosecution for trial experience and for courtroom experience. And it was really fulfilling as much as it was draining, working with victims of crime, working with rape victims, people like that, because you get the opportunity to see what the small things that you do, how much of a big difference they can make in someone else's life. So it can be a very rewarding career if that's something you're looking for.
So I'll go next. You know, I can't recall. I've lost track of all the sessions at this point, but I know that one of the things that I like about being an attorney that kind of translate from BISC is that BISC really taught me to think critically and logically. And I find that has given me a huge advantage when it came to working as a public defender, for example, when I was reviewing trials of people who were convicted and looking to make sure everything went out right. I just felt like I had a little bit more of a advantage there than perhaps some of the other majors.
Yeah. What's the hardest thing you've ever had to do in your job?
So the question was, what's the hardest thing you've ever had to do in the job? The hardest thing I've had to do was sitting down. So I was prosecuting a case, a rape case, sitting down with the victim and just seeing the 50,000-yard stare in her eyes and knowing that she just didn't trust anybody that she was with. And the hardest thing that I had to do was try to break through that. And it took hours and hours and hours of meeting with her just for her to open up a little bit about what happened. So there are some very tough things in terms of practice and being in the courtroom. The hardest thing I've ever had to do has been multi-day trials. It doesn't compare at all to meeting with rape victims or meeting with family members of people who have been killed. But in terms of just the physical exertion, when you're doing a trial, I would be up around 2 a.m. I'd be at the courthouse around 6. And there were nights you wouldn't get out until 9 and you had to prep for the next day. And it was just a cycle that went on until you were done. So it's extremely physically and mentally taxing, but as I said, it doesn't necessarily pale in comparison to other aspects of the job.
All right, well, thank you guys so much. Your next group is here. Sorry for taking up some of your time, but thanks again for sharing.
Hello, thank you so much for being with us today. I know you've been through it a couple of times now, but do you mind going through explaining who you are and what you do?
Sure, I think we have an order down at this point, so I'm going to start. My name's Joey Surge. Obviously, I'm a BISC alum. After BISC, I went on to law school. Started out as an intellectual property litigator, and that was my intention in doing BISC in the first place. I'm currently an administrative law judge. Just prior to this, I did aviation and aerospace defense, and I've got a number of other areas that I've been able to practice in beyond that. So I can speak to quite a few areas of law and try and answer any questions you've got.
Hi, everyone. My name's Erin Herdeman. I am a recent BISC alum of 2018, so I'm still in law school. I've been working at a patent prosecution firm, so also in intellectual property, which you'll see is a bit of a trend among folks in science who go to law school. And I've really enjoyed it. I have one more year left So I'm happy to answer questions today kind of about navigating the path to law school, applying those first couple years, and anything kind of pre-practice. Joey and Caitlin will have more experience than me to answer those questions a little better.
Hi, everyone. I'm Caitlin Lamb. I was a BISC major, then went on to law school. I actually went to law school thinking that I was going to do intellectual property, had the choice to do an IP job or to do the Wisconsin Innocence Project. I chose the Innocence Project, loved it, got hooked, and was a public defender for the appellate division for 9.5 years.
Do you guys have any questions? Yeah, go.
So I know Joey said that he went into the BISC program with the intent of going to law school. So did all of you have the intent of going to law school, or where was your path headed and how did it divert, I guess, and how did that process go for you?
I can go first. I did not come into Marquette thinking I wanted to go to law school. I picked Marquette and BISC specifically with the intention of either being pre-med or pre-PA, something clinical. And it wasn't until the end of my sophomore year where I realized that wasn't what I wanted to do. I had worked in a research lab in BISC for 2 years, so I knew I didn't want to work in a lab after graduation. And I just wasn't very attracted to the idea of practicing medicine anymore. I didn't really like how little contact doctors had with their patients. I didn't really like the way the medical system worked to begin with. So I got more interested in kind of like the policy implications behind all of those things and thought that I might want to do health law, medical malpractice, something to bring in my BISC degree. And I had a lot of conversations with my BISC advisor who navigated a lot of career options with me. And I got really interested in law school. I didn't know if it was the right thing. I didn't know what I would for sure do. But I didn't change my major, didn't change anything about what I was doing except for the fact that I took the LSAT after my junior year, which is the normal time to take it if you're planning to go straight out of Marquette into law school. But then I ended up taking a gap year before I went. So the switch was kind of a deep dive into knowing that I didn't want to do what I came there to do anymore and kind of figuring out what still interested me. I knew I didn't want a career I'd be able to get straight out. And that meant that I might need to find more school to go to kind of open up some careers that I was interested in.
So I came in and just really enjoyed science, but while at Marquette, I also realized that I just love to research and write. So ended up taking a lot of like crim law classes and English and anything that was writing intensive. And so kind of in terms of exploring what to do, made the decision to go to law school.
Any other questions? I know Joey and Caitlin, we've seen you a couple years at the BISC breakout now. I definitely recognize you. So sorry we didn't get to do that this year.
So are we.
Hopefully next year. So how does the BISC major translate into something like intellectual property law and things like that? Like, how do you use your BISC major?
Erin, you might be best to start with this one.
Sure. So there's kind of two main directions intellectual property is really big, but most of what I do is in patent law. So that's the writing of patents. There's also litigation that comes along with it that Joey maybe has a little bit of experience in, but at least for the patent prosecution part of it, I use my BISC knowledge every day and I'm only a clerk. So the equivalent of an intern, but you have a little more responsibility. And everyone I work with either has a science degree, an engineering degree, something of the like. And all of our clients are doctors, scientists, people who are inventing medical devices, pharmacological treatments. So it goes a long way. And I know Joey said this and I'm copying it, but to be able to talk the talk and talk their lingo a little bit, especially as someone who's just starting out, I've gotten myself a lot of credibility in getting to sit in on client meetings, even as a clerk, just being able to ask the right questions and understand the technology, and a little bit about how those things are going to work in practice. So just having that science background, especially in such a unique degree, there are not many schools in the country that have a biomedical science degree. You'll learn that when you apply for the patent bar. It's not something easily recognized, but it's important. And just the skill set that you have from being a BISC student, like Caitlin has said, really allows you to think critically, and be able to ask tough questions and keep up with things that might not be as easy for other people to catch on to.
Yeah,
I can go next. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Caitlin.
I was just going to say, so I had worked as a public defender, and while I was in that position, I represented all sorts of people, including, homicide cases where I'd have to be reviewing autopsy reports. I worked on operating while intoxicated, so I was looking at toxicology. DNA is common, and so I actually, as a criminal defense attorney, I used my science quite a bit, and I felt it gave me such an advantage compared to attorneys who maybe weren't familiar with some of the terms or lingos that pop up in the reports that commonly come up.
Yeah, just to piggyback on both a bit, your BISC degree probably sets you up best for intellectual property and patent practice in the life sciences and the medical industry, but that doesn't mean that your BISC degree is limiting you to those. I used mine constantly in all kinds of areas of law that you wouldn't expect, be it autopsy reports, as Caitlin said, toxicology reports, and it gives you the opportunity. It helps when you are used to such dense material and you can, as Aaron said, kind of talk the talk when you're working with experts to try and boil concepts down for juries so that they understand them in layman's terms, because you have a better understanding of it and you have the ability to have a better understanding of it because you've already been introduced to it.
That's awesome. Do you guys have any last questions? All right, well, only 2 more rounds to go. Thank you so much for being here tonight. You're learning so much.
Hello. We're your next group coming in. Thank you so much for bearing with us and with all these crazy time jumping into the teams and stuff like that. So I'm Ariana. I know you can't see me, but I'm a senior here at Marquette, studying biomedical sciences, and I have a lovely group of students with me who are super eager to hear what you have to say. So if you guys just want to start off by introducing yourself and then actually also kind of maybe going into what you do on a day-to-day basis. And then if it's okay, we can open the floor to some questions.
Sure, I'll start. So my name's Joey Surge. Obviously, I'm a BISC grad, went to law school. I'm currently an administrative law judge. So my day-to-day is really holding hearings most of the morning and early afternoon, and then I usually spend my afternoons and early evening writing decisions and opinions. Prior to being an administrative law judge, though, I did things across the board. I started out as an intellectual property litigator. Most recently, before this position, I did aviation and aerospace defense. But any questions you've got, I've probably touched on that field of law. So I'm happy to answer them.
I can go next. My name's Erin Herdeman. I'm a recent BISC alum. I just graduated in 2018, so I'm actually still in law school. I have 1 more year left. My day-to-day is a little different because I'm still in school, but I have been working at a patent prosecution firm for about a year now as a clerk. So it's similar to an internship, just a little more responsibility, and in the summers I'm full-time. And that's a kind of a niche area of intellectual property, which is a cool area to get into with your BISC degree, and you're actually set up to be allowed to practice it because you have to have a technical degree to practice patent law. So I'm happy to answer questions around kind of the all the parts leading up to law school, the application, getting in, those first couple of years, and navigating the job search once you're in law school. So happy to be here and answer questions.
My name's Caitlin Lamb. I BISC major, went to law school. I was a public defender for about 9.5 years. In that role, I did appellate work. So I would take on cases after somebody was convicted of a crime. And in that capacity, I would review everything that happened before in the trial, the investigation. Came across, I'd have to review DNA, autopsy reports, toxicology, do all sorts of things. And so I use my science a lot in that particular position.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So I'm going to just open it up to my floor here. And Parker, it looks like you have a question.
Yeah, I was just wondering, how was the move from BISC onto law school? Was it like a difficult shift, or was it no shift at all, really?
Erin, maybe you should go first on this one.
Sure. So I don't know that I'll be able to give this answer as well, but another group asked me this, and I said that I thought if I had to put BISC in one hand and law school in the other, I would still say that BISC was harder, and in different ways. Law school is a lot of work, but it's a very different kind of work than you all are used to in OChem and pharmacology and classes like that. I think I was set up really well in the sense that law school is similar in a way in that you're never really just memorizing a ton of information and spitting it back out on a multiple choice exam. There's a lot more critical thinking, problem solving, concise writing, which you get if you've ever had to write any papers for more science-based classes. So it was definitely a pivot. It's a different kind of school and learning, but I think that I had to navigate how to learn in some really tough classes at Marquette. So I think I was ready to kind of figure out how to tackle those classes and find productive ways to study for them and do well in them.
Yeah, I agree with Erin completely that BISC is tougher than law school, but it is a different environment. So with BISC, you might have 3, 4, 5 tests in a semester. With law school, you have one exam, and that's at the end of the year or at the end of the semester. And I've had exams that were 7 hours, 8 hours long, and I've had some that you had 24 hours to complete it. And in those 7 and 8 hour exams, you're just regurgitating the information that you learned over the year. And you will typically use almost all 7 or 8 hours, if not all of it. But the day-to-day, Erin's right, it's very different. So in BISC, you're going through a lot of material in each lecture, and you're doing the same in law school, but you're doing it for a different reason. You may read 10 cases for one day's lecture in law school, but each of those cases can be boiled down to a specific rule, and those cases kind of give you different views of how that rule is applied. So at the end of the day, you're putting in all kinds of work, but it's teaching you to think critically about that specific rule and giving you some examples of how you should think about it. So you're not getting as much information, even though you are consuming as much information just to boil it down.
It's been a while since I've been in law school, but my recollection was that I felt that BISC really prepared me just for the exams and the workload and keeping on top of things when it came to finals. And so I was so happy that I had the BISC degree going into law school for that reason.
And one other thing, just as a note on the difference between law school and BISC, and Erin could probably speak to whether this is still the case, but at least in my experience, the most important year you have in law school is your first year, because that's really what sets you up for if you're going for a big firm job or you're trying to get those higher paying jobs, they're going to look at your first year grades. Your second and third year grades, you can absolutely get your GPA up, but it's still going to be tougher to get those jobs because it's students that do well and put all of that effort into the first year that end up lining up those jobs while they're in law school. So that's another thing that's a little bit different than between law school and undergrad.
Okay, awesome. I'll turn it over to the floor again. Do any of you have any questions still? Was law the goal, like in your undergrad years, or did you have a different idea in mind?
So I'll start just because my answer is easy. Yes, it was my intention with BISC was to go to law school. I know Caitlin and Aaron have different stories.
I can go next. I did not want to go to law school. It was never in the picture or the plans. I came in pre-med and then navigated pretty much every other clinical career that I could do with BISC. I worked in a research lab for 2 years, so I even thought about going that route. And by the end of my sophomore year, I was still loving my major and the department because it's filled with awesome teachers and cool classes, but I knew I didn't want a clinical career anymore. And that kind of opened the floor to a lot of conversations with my advisor to see what else I could do, and kind of landed on the fact that I might have to go to more school in order to find some careers that I was really interested in. So I took a lot of criminology classes. I took some more sociology related classes, things in policy and healthcare. And I thought that law school seemed like a good idea for either a health law related career or something in medical malpractice. And having the science degree really set me up in law school to be funneled into intellectual property, which has been really interesting and I'm really enjoying. So I'd make the decision again, but it's definitely a tough one to arrive at just because I think the majority of people are not like Joey at Marquette, at least, coming in knowing they want to have a science degree to go to law school. That's a lot to put yourself through, I'm not going to lie. But there are so many cool things you can do aside from intellectual property with your BISC degree and going to law school. And there's non-law related careers that you can get more easily and open up to with your law degree. So it just, I feel like it opened a lot of doors for me at least.
I had no idea. And through the process of undergrad, just realized that I really liked research and writing. And so I had decided to go to law school. And I can't remember if you talked about this in this session, but I had actually planned on doing intellectual property or patent law because I thought then I'd be able to use my science in that respect. Ended up getting to law school and then deciding to go a completely different direction, which is, I think, one of the great things about law school is there's all different sorts of fields. Earlier, somebody said you could do medical malpractice, you could do intellectual property. I did crim law, but I felt like the BISC degree was just really valuable to have in law school.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. We appreciate a lot taking the time out of your evening. That's all the time that we have. We're going to move to our next room.
Basically, just what you guys have been doing with the previous other groups, just like to give a bit about your background and what you guys do in your current jobs right now.
So my name's Joey Surge. Obviously, I'm a BISC grad who went to law school. I started out in intellectual property litigation, which requires you to have a science background if you want to, largely if you want to do intellectual property, especially patent work. I'm currently an administrative law judge, so I'm no longer in the IP field. Previous to this position, I did aviation and aerospace defense, so I've run the gamut of legal careers. So any questions you have, I'll do my best to answer them.
I can go next. My name's Erin Herdeman. I'm a recent BISC alum. I just graduated in 2018. So I'm still in law school. I have 1 more year left. I've been working at a patent prosecution firm, so also in intellectual property, for about a year as a clerk, which is just a fancy law school name for intern. I'm happy to answer any questions you have about kind of the process of getting to law school, navigating that switch, and kind of pre-career questions.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Lamb. I went to law school thinking that I would do intellectual property and ended up making the switch, went in a different direction, and was a public defender for about 9.5 years. So happy to talk about too a little bit how I ended up using my science in that respect.
That's great. All right, do you guys have any questions to start off?
Yeah. What like are like some of the things like for like applying to law school? Like I guess things you should have on your resume. Stuff like that.
I can go first for this one. This was said in another group, but grades are a big step for law school. Your GPA is going to be looked at, but I will say that with a caveat, don't let it discourage you. Your BISC degree is going to be a leg up to begin with. So if you think you're average, you are probably still a leg in front of the game. So don't let that set you back at all. You also have to take the LSAT to get into law school, which isn't a ton of fun, but it's also an important step. As far as resume stuff, those things are important in the sense that they're going to put you ahead of other candidates, especially if you have a lot of leadership. If you were heavily involved and still maintain a good GPA, that's going to matter a lot. But really, the things on my resume that really helped me stand out and helped me the most ended up just getting me more scholarship money. Schools really like to see that you're a leader. They want to bring you in if they think you're going to be a good student and make them look good. So pretty much any experience you can get in extracurriculars and student orgs in leadership positions, those are the things I'd recommend. I don't think you need legal experience or to work in a legal office over the summer on your resume to get a leg up or to help you at all.
Yeah, I think Aaron's right on all points. I don't think that sometimes I think some legal experience can hurt you, especially if you're taking classes or things along those lines at an undergraduate level, because then you've got to likely forget concepts that have already been beaten into your head to relearn them the correct way. As far as what law schools look at the most, they're going to look at your GPA and they're going to look at your LSAT. And it hasn't come up yet tonight, but if the GPA is a concern, and it is, I know it is for some people, not necessarily anyone here, but there are schools that take what are called splitters. So if you've got a lower GPA, the higher your LSAT score, the better opportunity you're going to have to get in. So those are the two biggest factors. And just in my experience, I think there are some schools that just use an algorithm to figure out, they plug in your GPA, they plug in your LSAT score to figure out if they want to let you in. Because I know I had one school that I applied to, and within an hour of my application going complete. And so the process when you go through it is, it'll tell you where your application is in the process. Because for law school, you don't apply directly to the school, you apply to an organization that kind of coordinates all of the law school applications. So you know whether your application is being reviewed and whether everything is in, and the school has everything it needs to consider you. And in one of the instances, I had an acceptance within an hour of my application going complete, which tells me they didn't read any of my essays, which is probably good because I wrote one with the intention of getting blood, sweat, and vomit somewhere in the essay. But they clearly just focus on GPA and LSAT. And then the extracurriculars might be a deciding factor, and it's definitely a factor in scholarships. Aaron's right about that. But it might be a deciding factor if you're on the fence between getting in or not.
Just to add to that, and Aaron and Joey, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think that there is a website, or there was at one point out there, that was called Law School Numbers.
That's it.
That kind of showed GPA, LSAT for the schools, so kind of gave you a sense of where you might be able to get in, where you might not. So I just mentioned that in case anyone wants to explore that. And just, this doesn't really maybe answer the question, but one thing, you know, that's important too is that I did take a number of classes that were heavily intensive when it came to writing. And so in terms of, it doesn't really matter in terms of the application itself, but that would be something that might be worthwhile if anyone's considering law school.
Anything else have a question? Off that. How about, how did your BISC major help your career today, or help you in your law school currently as well?
I can go first. So as I was saying earlier, I was a public defender for a long period of time. And in that respect, my BISC degree helped me a lot because I dealt with people, you know, who had been convicted of a homicide, people operating while intoxicated. And so through that position had to review a lot of autopsy reports, toxicology reports, DNA, other laboratory tests. And so I felt like the BISC degree really helped me and kind of gave me a leg up on my opposing parties and even my colleagues to some extent, because I was very familiar with some of the terminology.
I had the same experience, you know, when you're looking at autopsy reports and things like that, toxicology, and at least in my experience when I was in the courtroom talking to experts to help interpret those documents for the jury, it really helped to be able to talk to those experts on a level that was closer to where they're at, and then also be able to parrot it back in a way that the jury can better understand it. So it's helpful regardless of whether you do intellectual property. Obviously, if you do intellectual property in life sciences, it's going to be directly on point because the material that you're going over now is going to be things that you're working with in your everyday life. But it really is applicable in almost every field of law in some way, simply because you're already dealing with dense material. And so the ability to deal with that and understand it, it's going to translate into law school, and it's going to translate into your legal career, because that's essentially what you end up doing every day.
I don't have much to add except in echoing that in patent prosecution, which is what I'm doing right now, all of our clients are doctors, scientists, engineers who are creating medical devices, pharmacology companies who are creating new drugs. So having a basis in what they do every day, even though they're the expert in it, has kind of set me up to be a lot more credible and an asset to the firm that I'm working with, because I'm able to talk to them and not sound like an idiot. I'm able to ask questions that are helpful, which is also really great for the clients because they don't feel like they're talking to a baby the whole time. So it's helpful in the sense that it's important for everything I'm doing at work. But also, as Joey was saying, it's the critical thinking skills that you've gotten from so many of your BISC classes are going to translate into any legal career that you would want, and also really give you a leg up in those careers just because it's so different than what anyone else has been exposed to.
That's great. Do you guys have any more final questions? Yeah, go ahead.
I heard you guys mention intellectual property a lot, and I've never really heard about that. Could you guys like elaborate on like what that is?
Who wants to go? I'll give a little bit and I'll let Joey and Caitlin build off as I go. Intellectual property encompasses a couple big areas that I bet you're more familiar with than you think. So copyrights, which you see on books, any written materials really, songs, trademarks. So like anytime you see a logo, like the Nike symbol, patents, and I think I'm missing like trade secrets. Patents are what you would think of on pretty much everything you use in daily life. So they can be on physical objects, they can be on chemical compositions. Half of the medicines that you would take, like Advil or Tylenol, probably have some kind of patent on them. So the part of intellectual property that I'm hoping to work in is patent prosecution, which involves like the writing of patents and kind of all of the arguing that goes up until getting that patent issued. So I work with a lot of clients who make medical devices. I work with clients who are, I'm trying to think of other BISC related things, things that you might use in surgery. A lot of doctors really enjoy working with people who understand some of what they're doing. But intellectual property is a huge area, and your BISC career would set you up well in any of the smaller niches of it. Patent law is just one that you're especially prepared for because you have the technical requirement that would allow you to practice it.
Yeah, and just to jump in there, so there's two big areas of patent law. One is what Aaron is doing, which is patent prosecution, and it's not the prosecution that you would think of with criminal law. Patent prosecution is sitting down and writing patents, and at the end of every patent is a section with the claims. And so Aaron may spend 100 hours trying to figure out exactly what word to use. And if she uses the wrong word, then you call in the patent litigators, because the patent litigators are going to spend $2 to $3 million a case and thousands of hours arguing about what that word means. So you don't typically do patent litigation and patent prosecution as a patent attorney. You usually choose one or the other. Patent prosecution, from the people that I know that have done it, they have a much better work-life balance. It's a lot closer to a 9 to 5 than it is any litigation job. With a litigation job, you're really going to be working in a big law firm, and you do the same with patent prosecution, but in big law firms, you're really on the clock 24 hours a day. So they're very different areas and they fit very different personalities. So a lot of outgoing people tend to navigate towards litigation. More introverted people tend to go to prosecution, but I've seen people on both sides.
And I don't have anything to contribute to this conversation other than to say that I don't know if we mentioned it in this session, but another option too that sometimes people with a science or technical background go into is medical malpractice, or, you know, a personal injury type field.
You know, there is one other thing we haven't mentioned, and that's becoming a patent agent. And so a patent agent is not a patent lawyer, but it's somebody who has a technical background, like a BISC background, that has taken and passed the patent bar. So to be a patent prosecutor, you have to pass the PAT bar, which is allows you to practice in front of the United States Patent and Trademark Office. To be a litigator, you don't have to pass it, but if you don't have that credential, it's a lot harder to find a job. It makes it much easier to navigate the legal field if you do have it. But you can also take the patent exam without a law degree, and that would make you a patent agent. And there's actually a law firm in Milwaukee that will hire on, they typically deal with mechanical engineers because that's their focus, but there are other law firms that do it too. They hire on recent graduates, they have them practice for a few years, take the PAT bar, pass it, and then they'll actually send them to law school for 3 years to become patent lawyers. And typically the way it works is they'll pay for your law school and you agree to work for them for X amount of time after you graduate. So if you're considering intellectual property and not entirely sold on law school, you might want to look into becoming a patent agent.
All right, do you guys have any final questions before we end off tonight? All right, well, thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to run this meeting and give a little insight into what you guys do. Thanks again.